Welcome to Prime 9, the countdown show that covers the very best in baseball. Guaranteed to start arguments, not end them. On this episode, it's the 9 best pitching rotations. Why 9? That's baseball. 9 players, 9 innings, Prime 9. What makes a great starting rotation?
Can't do it much better than that. That's the ball game!
Well, Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale were a dynamic tandem, as were these two Diamondbacks.
Co-MVPs Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling.
But a duo does not a rotation make. You need a group of men collectively eating up innings at a high level of effectiveness.
Unbelievable what we saw here tonight.
Depth of the rotation was one of our main criteria. So was ERA+, which measures a pitcher's earned run average against the league average that season with ballpark factors taken into account.
Swung on a miss, strike 3, and this ball game is over.
This was a tough one to judge, so let's get started with the top 9 pitching rotations of all time, starting with number 9 on Prime 9.
Hi, I'm Tim Hudson.
I'm Mark Mulder.
And I'm Barry Zito.
In an era dominated by offense, the 2001 A's pitching staff was unique.
Boulder, Hudson, and Zito, they got some arms, boy.
Mulder was that guy that, you kind of got mad at because everything he'd done, he was really good at.
That is an overpowering 1, 2, 3.
He was pretty much number 1. Mulder was throwing complete games after complete game.
A complete game over 9 innings.
And Tim Hudson was like a bulldog on the mound.
When it's time to go, he gets after it out there, and that's what's fun to watch. He's probably the most competitive person on this team.
There's a 3-pitch strikeout for Tim Hudson.
I left everything out there. Sinker, slider, cutter, and split.
A fastball on the inside corner.
And then you had Zito, who was just as dominant in the number 3 spot.
Barry Zito is the man of the hour.
I just remember that curveball. I was like, man, why don't you just throw that every pitch? They'll never hit it. And for the most part, he did, and they didn't hit it.
The curve got him.
Zito.
Big curveball, strike 3.
Right here.
Corey Lytle was the 4th man on the staff, and he held his own.
Swing and a miss. Just blows him away.
Mark won 21 games, Timmy won 18 games, and Z won 17 games, and not to mention the fact that Corey Lytle was 13-6 that year.
They were the first AL rotation in 41 years to have 4 starters finish in the top 10 in ERA.
It was just a lot of fun to go out there and know that every game you could see something special. The staff was a huge part of that.
They were young and successful, helping lead the 2001 A's to 102 wins.
Being put in a spot where you got to win a ball game or you got to make a big pitch.
He struck him out, and the A's have swept the series.
I think any one of us wants to be in that situation. That's what makes it a lot of fun.
Those guys have been awesome.
They were definitely one of the best rotations in the game for a while.
It was some of my best memories of baseball. There's no question about that. It wouldn't be nearly as great if I didn't have those teammates.
Few staffs in baseball were deeper than that of the 1986 Mets.
That's the ball game.
The Mets have won 7 in a row.
They were anchored by a 21-year-old who struck out 200 batters that season.
Doc had an exceptionally great arm. You knew he was going to be pretty dominant every time he took the ball.
Swing and a miss.
He had that big curveball that guys just couldn't hit.
Curveball gets Mumphrey.
He had an overpowering fastball.
Good fastball blows Sandberg right out of it.
If you got one hit at night, you want to throw a party.
Number 12, Ron Darling.
Ron Darling was a very mature pitcher, very smart, had excellent stuff.
Swing and a miss, he got him.
Consistently good. He was quick. You had to respect him as a base runner.
Coleman is picked off at second base.
Sid Fernandez won 16 games, thanks in part to his deceptive delivery.
Sid, with that herky-jerky, funky, unbelievable way of pitching.
He was a tough cookie. He had a good, sneaky fastball, along with a real excellent curveball.
3rd strikeout for Sid Fernandez.
It was Bob Ojita's first year with the Mets, but he just might have been their ace.
I thought that he was a very creative pitcher. He mixed his pitches up well. He challenged hitters.
Curveball got him looking.
He had an outstanding changeup, and he could throw his changeup on any count, kept the ball down very well.
Oh, what a great pitch.
One more thing. Rick Aguilera was a spot starter, but still won 10 games.
Got him swinging.
The rotation helped the Mets sport the major's best ERA. And Ojeda, Gooden, Sid, and Darling had the NL's top 4 winning percentages.
They're spreading the news that they are right now the dominant team in this game.
The result of their resolve was an amazing 108 wins and, of course, a titan.
The Mets have won the World Series.
We had a really good fit and a good mix. They were the dominant team, no question about it, in the National League.
Welcome back to Prime 9, featuring the 9 best starting rotations. We've made our case for 9 and 8, which means it's time for number 7. The core of the 1971 Orioles was its starting staff.
It was a team built around this pitching, and it was so exciting to go to those games and watch these pitchers.
Manager Earl Weaver had quite an arsenal of arms, including the gutsy, gritty lefty Dave McNally.
He could pitch, and he could pitch inside, he could pitch when he was hurt. If you needed a win, I mean, he was going to be the guy that wanted the baseball.
Then we had Jim Palmer, who was a hard thrower, a rising fastball, also an intelligent pitcher.
Palmer's won 11 games, appears to be headed for another 20-game season.
All the hitters on the other opposing teams, they kind of really geared up for Palmer because he was the power pitcher, and he would blow people away.
And there's the 10th strikeout for Jim Palmer.
Cuellar, another crafty left-hander with a great screwball. Devastating pitch against right-handed pitchers, and he had the breaking ball for the left-handers.
Crafty pitching by Mike Cuellar.
He had 3 pitches. He got him over anytime he wanted to, any situation, and he would just battle you. And he threw strikes, and that's what made him so effective.
As much as a good time that Mike Cuellar had, Dauber might even have a better time.
Pat Dobson acquired in an off-season trade from San Diego to strengthen the Baltimore depth.
He could get you out 3 or 4 different ways.
We call him the Snake because he had a great overhand curve ball.
The O's won 101 games in '71, and their starting pitchers made baseball history.
Cuellar, McNally, Dobson, and Palmer all end up with 20 or more victories. First time that had happened in the major leagues in the live ball era, and the last time it's happened.
It would be almost impossible, I think, for a team to build a pitching staff that had 4 20-game winners today. I'd like to see it happen, but I don't think it will.
Our next selection just might raise some eyebrows, but the 2005 White Sox were collectively superb.
I don't believe we had what you would call a number 1 guy, but each guy on that staff pitched like a 1.
Swung on a miss, strike 3, and this ball game is over.
The personal competition between them, they make him better, and I think that's the reason they performed the way they did.
Swing and a miss, he gone.
Garland really started to blossom, won 18 games that year.
John Garland, his second straight 4-hit shutout.
Contreras caught fire. When he couldn't be beat, it seemed like for almost a whole year. I mean, every time we went out there, we were winning games.
Swing and a miss again on another fastball.
Burley, he was a stud. Went to the post every 5 days. Went out there, and our job description here of a starting pitcher, he's going out there for the bulk of the work.
Strike 3 called on the outside corner. Mark Burley with a trademark inning.
Freddie Garcia, big game Freddie. Freddie loved the big moments.
Swing and a miss, he struck him out.
Freddie went out there and threw a lot of breaking balls. He was throwing split fingers and sliders.
Throw right down the middle, he can't hurt you.
Strike 3 called down the middle, and he knew it.
Not since 1927 had an AL team featured 4 starters with more than 200 innings and an ERA plus of 115.
They were the backbone of the team the whole year. We didn't score a ton of runs. It seemed like we always won 2-1 or 3-2. So our pitching constantly was keeping us in games. And then when the playoffs hit, they just kind of took it to another level.
What those 4 guys did, especially in the postseason, was unbelievable. I mean, we played 5 games in the ALCS, and our bullpen threw 1/3 of an inning.
The White Sox starting pitchers have worked every inning of this LCS.
4 starts, 4 complete games, not seen since 1956.
I don't think that'll ever be done again. It was an amazing thing to watch.
Led by their rotation, Chicago went on to sweep the Astros.
The White Sox have won the World Series.
Across the board, all of them are very gutsy and all wanted the ball and can't win World Series unless you have that, and those guys are pretty special.
Welcome back to Prime 9, featuring the game's best starting rotations. We opened with the 01 A's and the 86 Mets. Then came the 71 Orioles, followed by the 2005 Chicago White Sox. Now we trip the time machine for number 5.
The 1927 Yankees pitching is the forgotten group of that team. Obviously, with Murderers Row and Ruth and Gehrig, the team was bound to score a lot of runs, and I think most pitchers would have done pretty well pitching for this team. But the group of guys they did assemble did a great job that year.
Wade Hoyt was the ace of the staff and led the league in wins.
He was a typical curveball, fastball, changeup specialist.
He had a reputation as a big game pitcher, and he backed that up by going 5-0 in the World Series in his career.
Key pitcher for this staff, apart from Hoyt, who was fantastic, was Wilcie Moore.
And the 30-year-old rookie was unknowingly ahead of his time.
Wilcie Moore was a pitcher who started the year as kind of an extra man on staff. And as the year went on, Miller Huggins started using him late in games in the way we would use a fireman 50 years later. You could argue that Wilcie Moore was the first fireman.
He actually earned 13 saves, and also during the end of the year started to be used more in a starting role. And the Yankees actually used him extensively in the World Series.
Urban Shocker, which is one of the greatest names in baseball history, won 18 games in 1927.
He had tremendous control. He only threw 20 wild pitches in his entire career.
19-game winner Herb Pennock loved to pitch for those Yankee bats.
Pennock was the typical crafty left-hander, had not much of a career before coming to the Yankees, and then suddenly became a star.
He was renowned for his very thin arms, and he would snap the curveball viciously. Probably apocryphal, but they said that you could hear the snap of his curveball from the dugout when he threw it.
Moore, Hoyt, and Shocker finished 1-2-3 in ERA that year, the first American League staff to ever accomplish that feat.
There's a reason why the 27 Yankees are remembered, and it's not just for their hitting. This staff was as good as it gets.
In an era dominated by pitching, the 1910 A's stood out.
Connie Mack had an eye for talent, and he would take a variety of pitchers and just mold them, and it became the heart of this team.
And they followed the beat of Jack Coombs.
Coombs was pretty much the ace of the staff. From 1910 to 1912, he was one of the best pitchers in the American League.
Coombs set the current AL record for shutouts with 13, but there was more.
Eddie Plank was a Hall of Fame pitcher and one of the great left-handers of all time.
A 16-game winner that year, Plank is one of the winningest southpaws in the history of the game.
Plank, long-term, was probably the best starter on the staff, won 326 games, was not necessarily the star that season, but over the course of his career was one of the top starters in the American League.
As was Mac's best big-game pitcher, Albert Chief Bender.
Bender was fantastic in that he improved his ERA every year from the start of his career through 1910. 1910 would be his best season.
Chief's 1.58 ERA that year was his third straight under 2.
He would go on to win 212 games and reach the Hall of Fame.
The A's actually had 3 pitchers with a sub-2 ERA in 1910, including journeyman Cy Morgan.
Cy Morgan had a losing record until he came to the Athletics, but when you take a good pitcher from a bad team and put him on one of the best teams in history, he became a consistent big winner for the Athletics.
The A's staff still has the lowest ERA in AL history, but they relied almost solely on their ace in the World Series.
Coombs started games 2, 3, and 5, completed them all, won them all, and between games 2 and 3, he just had 1 day of rest. It's one of the greatest pitching performances ever in a World Series.
Then there were the 1954 Cleveland Indians.
It was a tremendous staff at the top of its game. They led the league in ERA. They also had the fewest base runners allowed in the leagues.
The versatile early win led the league with 23 wins.
He did a little bit of everything. He could hit his spots, he could throw off speed. He was very durable, but very multi-talented as well.
Tying win for the league lead that year was fellow Hall of Famer Bob Lemon.
Bob Lemon was a consistent 20-game winner.
Lemon has been the Indians' clutch pitcher this season, winning 23 games.
He always threw a variety of curveballs, a sinking fastball. He was a tremendous athlete and very crafty as well.
Holding down the next spot was a 19-game winner who also led the league in ERA.
Mike Garcia was a big, hard-throwing pitcher. known as the Big Bear.
Garcia had a good fastball. He threw a good sinker. He pitched a lot of hitters on the inside corner of the plate.
And checking in with 15 wins was righty Art Houdeman.
Art Houdeman had a good fastball, good sinker, a good curve. He could go 9 innings and never get tired.
Rapid Robert should know, for he was the 5th man in this rotation. And though he was in the twilight of his career, he was still a master on the mound.
I won 13 and lost 3 and didn't pitch that much. I was over the hill, I knew that, but I was getting along with my control and knowing the hitters.
No one really factored him in as a contributor to a pennant run in 1954, but he was great.
The starters accounted for 93 of the team's 111 wins, guiding the 54 Indians to the best winning percentage in AL history.
The strength of this team was its rotation. Even in talking about Houdeman and Feller as being their number 4 and number 5 guys, no team had that kind of depth.
For pitching staffs, top to bottom, I would say the 1954 Indians are as good as they got.
Maybe so, but we've got 2 better next on Prime 9. We now return to Prime 9, where this week we're featuring the best starting pitching rotations of all time. Our choices so far have included staffs that pitched just a few years ago to those that took the mound a century ago. So now it's time for numbers 1 and 2, the very best rotations the game has ever seen. We begin with number 2. Few pitching staffs dominated a decade like the 1990s Braves, though we had many great seasons to choose from. We went with the 1997 Braves and the core of Greg Maddux, John Smoltz, and Tom Glavine.
They made the Braves who they were for so long. Facing those guys back to back to back, it was no weak spot.
I look at you, I look at Mad Dog, I look at Smokesy. Advantage pitchers.
Glavine, Maddux, Smoltz, or Smoltz, Maddux, Glavine, or Maddux, Smoltz, Glavine. I mean, however, it was always the 3 of us were mentioned in the same breath.
Maddux, Glavine, and Smoltz. It's amazing.
Maddux was the professor, the guy who could throw the ball anywhere he wanted it.
Maddux is sawing right through this lineup.
Talking about the greatest control of anybody I've ever seen in my entire life. I've never seen anybody hit a target like he could.
Can't do it much better than that. Greg Maddux puts on another clinic.
When he would practice down in the bullpen, if he was off target by an inch, he was upset.
Glavine has been masterful tonight.
Glavine's the athletic guy, the left-hander who had a great changeup and was just such a competitor.
He always told me hitters have egos, and I'm going to take advantage of it.
Well, he's out of there on 3 pitches against Glavine.
He wanted to win more than the other guy.
Tom Glavine with a brilliant 3-hit shutout.
He always found a way to make that big pitch, get that big out.
Got it. John Smoltz strikes out the side.
John Smoltz probably had the best stuff of anybody on the staff.
John Smoltz triumphant once again.
He was the guy who threw 95 miles an hour and had the slider that guys couldn't hit.
Got it.
And yet, incredibly, it was number 4 man Denny Nagel who that year led the league in wins.
And I'm sure that he's taken a little bit of Smoltz, a little bit of Glavine, and a little bit of Maddux and added to what he already had.
Denny Nagel, another guy who was real crafty. He really kept you off balance.
Struck him out.
He loved to compete and brought a lot of energy each night that he threw.
Denny Nagel has himself a shutout.
With all 4 starters posting impressive earned run averages compared to the league average, there's no questioning their dominance.
2-1 and 1-0 were huge leads. If we could score a run, the game was over.
Another complete game, another shutout.
It's a privilege to pitch with those guys, really, to be honest with you. Every night you got a chance to watch a good pitcher go out there and do his thing.
Struck him out and the ball game is over.
The 1906 Cubs were an offensive powerhouse. There was no weak spot. Still, when you think about the 1906 Cubs more than a century later, you're going to focus on the pitching staff.
The ace of that staff was Mordecai Brown, whom they called Three Finger for good reason.
He had a deformed hand from a childhood accident where he was missing his index finger, his middle finger was bent, and his pinky finger was paralyzed. And this enabled him to get incredible spin on the ball. It was very hard to hit.
Best evidenced by his 26-6 record.
This was a guy that was a ground ball pitcher. You could not elevate the ball. You could not do anything better than a single on your best day. Absolutely a dominant pitcher, and really a legend in baseball history.
Southpaw Jack Feister went 20-8 that year and would soon earn a lasting nickname.
He was a small left-hander. He threw sidearm. Ended up winning 71 games in his career.
He was known as Jack the Giant Killer because he had a gift for beating the arch-rival Giants.
Ed Rulebach was in his second year that year and was known for his very good fastball.
In 1906, one of the most astounding statistics ever, allowed 129 hits in 217 innings.
And much like Mordecai, Ed also had a physical challenge, one you wouldn't think a pitcher could overcome.
He was partially blind in his left eye. When the wind kicked up and dust blew into his right eye, he had a hard time seeing home plate.
Carl Lundgren was 17-6 as the fourth starter that year. And with 24 wins between them were Jack Taylor and Orville Overall.
These guys were also very good pitchers, but they were the fourth, fifth, sixth starters on an incredible staff.
The 1906 Cubs won 116 games, and thanks in great part to their pitchers, they still own the best winning percentage in modern history.
The 1906 Cubs weren't just a product of the dead ball era. They were a great pitching staff.
And their ERA plus remains the best of all time.
The staff ERA was 50% better than the league average. This is the highest differential in the 20th century.
If you consider performance in their time, this is the greatest rotation in baseball history.
Baseball buffs remember Mordecai Brown as one of the game's top starters, but was also quite a force pitching in a pinch, as they used to say. Today we call them saves.
Milestone number 600!
The save statistic was not even introduced until 1969. But looking back, we find that Brown led the league in saves each year from 1908 through 1911, and led in both saves and shutouts at 1910. It's doubtful that any of today's pitchers will ever equal that feat.
Strike three to end the game.
Fact is, Mordecai Peter Centennial Brown finished his career in 1916 with 239 wins. But until 1926, no one in baseball had more saves than he. Must have been that three-finger curveball. That's our Prime Nine. What's yours?